Hi everyone, welcome to the June Q&A. I am Karen Brown of Just Get It Done Quilts, and I'm so glad that you're here with us today. It looks like we have lots of people here. So let me just check and make sure I am in the right spot. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to check with Gina. Gina, am I in the right place? Okay, there's everybody. Sorry, I was a little worried there. Okay, so I hope everybody's doing fine. What is it like here? Everything is good here. I'm madly preparing for the cruise in 3 weeks. I leave 3 weeks yesterday. And, you know, there's stuff to be done, projects to be finished, and videos to make. So I'm glad you're all along for it. I am just going to start over here with the first question that we had. Nancy Cox from Karen's Quilt Crew had a really good question, and she was talking about wide binding. And I had a moment to just do a little drawing here because I think that you need that just to help explain it. So I like to make my binding often wider than the regular 1/4 inch, which you get with a 2-inch to a 2.5-inch binding strip. And the way I make my wide binding is, so we have a little 1/4 inch right there. I just leave my batting on wider up here. You could not do that and just clean it up at a 1/4 inch and then go down farther. But what happens is you end up cutting off these points right here. So that's why I go the other way. And you just need to do the math, do a couple of practice pieces. I actually have a little library of width of binding strips and different widths, because sometimes you want a snug fit, sometimes you want a softer fit. And I just keep them, and then I'll hold them up to my quilt and kind of assess which one's better. But I often like to go to a 1/2 inch, and in the last couple of months, I've made a number with 1 inch and 1.5 inch. So that gets a little expensive for some people, but I had the fabric in my stash, so I just used it. And the only thing that you have to worry about, and I've done a video on it, so just check the binding series and you'll see it, is you just need to worry about the corner. So let's say it was an inch binding that you're doing, okay? So you've cut 3/4 inch up here. You add the 1/4 inch here. That makes the 1 inch. You need to stop here at 1 inch as well. And then when you fold it back to up here where the edge of the thing is. So it looks a little bit strange, but trust me, that's what you need to do to give yourself the space. And the corner works just like the regular corner otherwise. Okay, so let's see what's next. How do I calculate the size needed for the individual blocks in a 9 patch? So that's a pretty easy one too. I'm glad I got the easy ones first. So a 9 patch is just, we have 2 here and 2 here, right? That's what a 9 patch is. So you take your finish measurement, finished, not the cutting measurement, the finish measurement from here to here. You divide that by 3, and then you add a 1/2 inch. So let's say this was 9 inches. Okay, so you divide that by 3. So that means these would be 3.5 that you need to cut every time. Now, it's also different if it's an HST, so always know that too. If this was, that's why 10-inch 9 patches are a little bit funky, because the math doesn't work out right. So normally you see 9 patches, 6 inches, 9 inches, 12 inches, 15 inches. So do yourself a favor and do something with easy math. Let's see what else we have here. Chantel has said, knitters have Ravelry where they can find patterns. Is there anything similar as a source for quilt patterns? There's a couple, but there's so many big magazines and things like that. I've never actually found a place where everybody wants to put their patterns. I mean, everybody has a love-hate relationship with Etsy. And I'm trying to think of any. There's one that I saw at QuiltCon, and I cannot get it. I cannot pull up the name for the life of me. Maybe somebody else knows that. I know Geeky Bobbin has her patterns there. Karen Bolin has patterns there. Cassandra Beaver has her patterns there. And another place that you might go is to Pre-Quilt. They have a whole stable of quilters that use their app, and they will direct you to where you can buy them from. Yeah. Oh, Picure from Instagram has said, I'm wondering how much good quality quilting fabric costs in Canadian quilt shops. In Oregon, it's generally $12 to $14 a yard now. I'm just curious. Well, I did have time to do the math. So up until a couple of months ago, quilting cotton was $19.96 per meter. So that's Canadian per meter, which works out to $18.25 per yard. And if you convert it into US dollars, that's $13.34 US dollars. But we've just had a price increase. So some of the yards are the old price and some of them are the new price, and they've gone up to $21.96 meter, which is $20.08 Canadian per yard, which is $15 US per yard. There's the math. Okay. Brenda has asked me if I will be attending Quilt Canada later this month in Edmonton. I am not. It's just a bad timing this year. June always seems to be bad timing for me with Quilt Canada when it's out of the province. And I'm not able to make it because I'm just preparing for the cruise. But I will be there at it next year when it is in Toronto again. Beth Douglas has asked, I'm having an electrical outlet installed outside my home so I can sew on the featherweight on her deck this summer. That sounds absolutely lovely. Am I going to have any visible issues by using different machines on a single project if I take it inside and work on it on my baby lock? So you probably have heard, you hear it at retreats, you hear it in Stitch and Chat groups, that different machines have a different 1/4 of an inch. And that's not exactly what they mean. What they mean is if you use the same reference points on 2 different machines, they can measure differently. You can get a perfect 1/4 inch seam on any machine if you just do the extra effort to make sure you have it. So no, you won't have any problems with that. But you might maybe divide up your project so it's easier to do outside. You'll do one thing outside and you'll do another thing inside. That's the only thing I would recommend. I often have had that happen, and it's just makes it easier so you're not always moving your stuff from one location to another. You can keep your baby lock set up, and then you can keep your stuff for your featherweight set up in a kit or something like that, and you don't have to be pulling it out in multiple locations where it's easy to lose equipment. It's easy to lose pieces. Yeah. Daphne Wagon has asked, do I heavily starch my fabrics before cutting? Do you find starch fabrics are easier to keep flat on the long arm? She's fairly new to quilting in the long arm, and sometimes she gets a slight fold on her pieces, which affects my long arm quilting. It looks flat. I do not heavily starch my fabrics. I actually use very little starch. The only time I use it is when I'm doing a block with a bias. So if I am sewing one at a time HSTs, or like for my kaleidoscope quilt, I'm using blocks with a sharp 45-degree angle, I may starch those just depending on how the fabric feels and how my accuracy is going. So yeah, I'm not a big starcher. Part of it is it takes up too much time and I'm anxious to get going. And part of it is sometimes I don't think I need it, but I definitely use it when I need it. Like it's there by my sewing machine. And the trick is to use it at the right time as well. You use it on your fabrics before you cut them. You don't use them on your blocks after you're done, because the starch, if you haven't pre-washed your fabrics, it can shrink them. So you want them to shrink the fabric first and then use it in your quilt. Sorry, the next person, I don't know who has said it, but she says she has a question about the walking foot. She has a 1986 Bernina 1120. Do the legacy machines require walking feet when sewing a quilt sandwich? Definitely, and you will not regret spending the money on it if you're quilting on a sewing machine. So I have the 910, which is a step down from that machine, and it goes everywhere with me. And I actually use it a lot. I often keep the walking foot on for other projects, and it gives just a beautiful stitch. I just really, really like it. So Hazel has asked, if you follow a link for an item from your videos and put the items in our Save It for Later list, do you still get credit if we send it back to our cart and buy it at a later date? If you're talking about Amazon, I don't think so. The way Amazon works is you get a percentage. Full disclosure, the affiliate links work this way for everyone. It works that if you use the portal of one of my items or anybody's affiliate link to Amazon, you get a commission on anything that person buys in the next 24 hours. So if you go and buy, let's say I recommend a thimble, and then you go buy a swimming pool, I get a credit on both of them. But it's only for those 24 hours. So if you put it in a save later, it doesn't come back to me. At least I don't think it does. For other affiliate links, they're usually connected through a coupon code or something like that, but they always have to be declared. So if I'm making a commission on it, you'll see in brackets beside the link that there's some kind of affiliate payment for it. Yeah. And in Amazon, I think it's so small. So small. It basically pays for a couple of coffees a month. I shouldn't say that. At Christmas time, it is a little bit nicer than that. But yeah, it's very small compared to what I make on YouTube. Lloydie Loves asks, when you were a beginner quilter and designed your own block from scratch, only discovered it was a well-known old block, which block was that? That was the card trick block, or sometimes called card play or whatever. I had originally seen it, and it was mirrored. There was one in one spot and one in the other. And then I thought, oh, wow, I'll make it look like this, and it'll look like a deck of cards. And somebody else had already thought that. And I've actually learned an easier way to make it as well. I made it with HSTs and quarter square triangles, where if you turn the block on point, there's an easier way to make it. Ooh, somebody has asked me if I know a good source for fluorescent fabric for a child's quilt. If you were local, I would recommend Len's Mills, but other than that, I really don't know. Sorry. What are the size blocks in the quilt behind me? I think I measured them before and they were 4.5. Let me measure them again. They're 4. So if you were making, if you had a charm pack or you were making that from scratch, you would use 5-inch HSTs and cut them down. Somebody's asked, I don't understand how to make a block lie flat when multiple fabrics join, such as in a 4-patch or a 4-pointed star. Can you explain? Don't be worried about the fold in fabric unless you've got 8 or more coming together. if it's just 4 and you're folding to the dark side, and then you're going to have one corner that has a little bit more than the others, when you quilt that, those layers are going to sink into the quilt a little bit more, and it's not going to feel as bumpy as you think it is. And quite frankly, some of those bumps and that are what people like for as they're holding the quilt. They can be a very tactile experience, and people like to rub them a little bit more. So don't worry about the bumps so much. But what you're talking about is spinning your seams, and I'm pretty sure I explained it in one of the episodes of the Quilt Coach. The trick is, I don't even think I can explain it because I don't have a block nearby. Go to one of the Quilt Coach episodes, and it will be there. I'm currently doing that for a quilt that I'm working on, and it has 16 pieces meeting, and the trick is just to spin them. And there's still a bump in the middle. It's just a little bit flatter than it was before, and it's spread a little bit more evenly. Creative Mind says, it seems weird to quilt all over applique. 2 blocks in my baby quilt are pierced like that. What do you suggest? I'm actually not quite sure what you mean by that. I wonder if you could expand on that. Are you talking about doing a turned edge applique something and then you're quilting as you do something all over it? Or are you talking about something else? Lynn's so imperfect. Hello, Lynn. How are you doing? Have you ever done a PMQ BOM? PMQ. PMQ. Block of the BOM stands for block of the month. I do not know what PMQ stands for. Anybody in the the chat could tell me. I'm just looking through here. Lots of people great people. Sharon's here from Australia, and John is here, of course. Has anybody seen John's new sew along? It's in the Enchanted Wood. Is that it? It's Winnie the Pooh. It's also a beautiful, beautiful Winnie the Pooh characters done the way that he can only do them. So I'm in. Oh boy, look at these people. Oh boy, good to see you from all over Washington, Maine, Illinois, Colorado, California, Dayton, Ohio, Washington State. Yes, we are ready. Southern Texas, Ohio, Winnipeg. Hey, some Winnipeg people. I think I saw somebody else from Winnipeg here too. Oh boy, look at everybody. Canberra, Australia. We got a couple of Australians in here. Is it too late for people from the UK? Okay, so I'm just seeing whether I can turn up my sound. I think I'm maxed out on my sound. I'm sorry, I cannot turn it up any higher. I'll try and sit a little bit closer. It's right here. Any more, it'll be in the picture. Liz McDonald says, I like to make my quilts 120 inches wide for my king size bed, but I have a hard time finding someone with a long arm that can quilt it. Where should I look? So you're looking for somebody with a 12-foot or 14-foot rails on it. And many people, myself included, I only have 10 feet. That can be a little bit hard to find. But I would probably look at a store that sells the long arms, and they can probably link you up with some local people that have bought the long arms in those sizes. Or check with local quilt stores too, because even though they may not have a quilter in the store, they may have business cards on the wall of people that you might be able to catch. Kathy Has Faith has asked, do you have a recommendation for English paper piecing patterns? I'm new to English paper piecing, find it relaxing, but need some pattern ideas. So Emma, at Vintage Sewing Box. She was on my podcast a couple of years ago. She has all sorts of delightful ones. So very hexagon based and just lovely little projects that get done. And she has bigger projects that she does as well. You can also take a look over at paper piecing. Paper piecing is the people that supply papers for paper piecing, English paper piecing, and they've got all sorts of cushions and different patterns for big projects and small. So you can take a look there. How is Sunshine is asked, how is the sizing different for the individual blocks of a 9-patch? So back to this question here. So let's say we are looking for 3-inch finished. So if you're making squares or rectangles, you add a 1/2 inch, 0.5 to each side. If you are doing an HST, sorry, I'm catching the light here. If you're doing an HST, you have to add 7/8. And that's if you can do one perfectly. If you can't do one perfectly, you're like the rest of us, you add extra. I add 1 inch. But if you're a brand new person, don't hesitate to add 1.25 inches. And just as you get more comfortable, make that closer and closer to 7/8. Because it's so easy to go off. When you're sewing an angle, you don't have anything to guide you except the line, and it's easy to make it wonky. It's easy to sew on the wrong side of the line. So the answer to this one, then, if you're doing them 3-inch, then you'll need 4-inch squares for your HSTs. And that's for doing it 2 at a time or 1 at a time. Irene Reynolds, for the scrap strips for a king-size bed that I just recently posted, can you give me an estimate of how much yardage you used for the 1-inch strip? I just need a ballpark. I hate to say I don't know. I think I used 4 yards. I'm pretty sure it was 4 yards, and I cut the strips along the straight of grain because I was really concerned that they would be stretchy, and I was using the whole width because I needed so many. But I will check on that. I ordered some peacock. It was peacock linen by Essex Linen by Kaufman. I'm pretty sure I ordered 2 yards, and then I ordered an extra 2. Aria Mora says, quilting quality cotton. What exactly are the characteristics that you're talking about? What are the problems if cotton is not this quality? How can we tell if the fabric is no longer labeled? So when people say quilting quality cotton, they're talking about fabric that's 40 to 42 inches wide. There's a print on one side and nothing on the other. And it's a fairly tight weave. It usually comes in collections as well. So, and there's people that specialize in high quality quilting fabric like Moda, Free Spirit, Riley Blake, Andover, Figo, Northcott, Make Hour, and those are just the ones I can think of off the top of my head. But those aren't the only ones out there. So some people use wovens, some people use shirts and other things. So what they're really concerned about is the fabric. Often you can find at the discount stores, and the weaves are very big, like the threads per inch are low, and sometimes the gray goods underneath that they're printing on are not a good quality either. So they're made from cotton that's very that can pile, or there's also an issue with color fastness as well. So there's a number of issues that get into poor quality quilting cotton. So, some people can't afford to buy the good stuff. And who says the good stuff is the brand new stuff as well? I met a woman who quilted all her life with silk that she found in secondhand stores. And I know there's people that do that with wool and other fabrics. And there's people that just use shirts, woven fabric from shirts. So it's basically using what you want to use. So you, anytime you veer from quilting cotton, it brings in different issues. But it's not to say that it's wrong. You just need to learn how to sew with those fabrics. So if there was a wider weave, then you be sure to pre-wash it. Be sure to make sure that it's color fast. And of course, always do the flame test if it's going to some children, and things like that. So those are the things that you look for. You're looking for fastness and a tight weave. Brenda Emmons says, I'm wanting to draft up a pattern of a cat made with lots of eyes, nose, so a lot of pieces in the face, the eyes, nose, etc. When cutting the fabric, do you add 1/4 of an inch on all sides? So if they are rectangles, you add 1/4 of an inch to all side, or 1/2 an inch to the length and the height, unless they are cutting on the diagonal, where you'll add an inch and cut the piece in half and use that. Yeah. Rebecca, I have a chronic illness and my mom just got out of the hospital. I don't have the energy to sew. Is this normal loss of sojo? I have seen your video. Is this normal? Well, it sounds like it's normal. You've got a lot on the go. You've got a chronic illness that you're trying to manage, and you've got the added worry and physical effort of your mother coming home from the hospital. So to say that your sojo is gone, that's perfectly normal. But trying to get back to sewing is debatable on whether you should or you shouldn't. Does sewing bring you joy? If it does, and it helps you fill your bucket, how can you get your foot or dip your toe back in the water? That's why I always like English paper piecing, but if you've got fibromyalgia or something like that, that's just not going to work. So maybe something that can bring back your sojo is just looking through magazines or something like that, reviewing the quilting channels, and looking at the feed through Instagram and things like that to see what other people are doing, and getting yourself psyched for a time when maybe things are less stressful. Part of losing your sojo is you just don't have the brain space to load in all the information that you need to know when you're quilting. You're thinking of a pattern and you're trying to hold what have I done? What do I need to do? Where do I need to cut? And you're thinking forward on, I'm going to have to bind this and I've got to quilt this. How am I going to do that? And that's a pretty heavy load on you. So there's a lot of easier ways to ease into things. If you can do the hand sewing, just doing hexes, you can make them into something, or you can just collect them, or just making bonus blocks. I keep telling them they're bonus blocks, but that's what I've made from my scraps. And it's just so easy to sit down and not have to think about it. Like, I'm not thinking about what colors go together. I'm not thinking about what size these need to be, because that's already been pre-decided. All I need to do is sew, and I let the momentum of just producing a pile of bonus blocks get me into the next stage and start thinking about new ideas and things like that. And it's amazing what comes. And sometimes they're just ideas, you don't have to follow through on the ideas, but it's really fun when ideas start coming. And I actually experienced that this morning. It was wonderful. I was working on some basic blocks, and suddenly some possibilities just opened, and it was just a really nice feeling. Yeah. Creative Minds has asked, all over quilting on on a mostly piece quilt, but 2 blocks are machine applique. Feels weird to quilt over the applique. Any suggestions? Okay, so I think this refers to the question that I was answering earlier about applique blocks and quilting. So often what people do with applique is they trace the outside of the applique, and they will add quilting inside the applique just to add some texture to it, whether it be, you know, feathers on a bird or just some extra details to hold it down. And you can do that on panels as well, you know, trace the outline of things and then just use another stitch. The only thing is that you possibly have to cut your thread and start again. And for some people, they don't want to cut their thread ever. They just want to just go from one area to the other. So that's one of the reasons why they might have done it that way. Gladys, thank you for popping in with what a PMQ is. I need to add that to my quilting code. Puzzle mystery quilt. Funny, when I first started quilting and my cousin was pulling me in to start teaching right away, it was amazing. But she was showing me of a mystery quilt that she had done. And I found it fascinating. She said nobody guessed the pattern until the very, very end. It was really good. So I've been, in the back of my mind, I've been thinking of quilt patterns like that you could surprise people with. But no, I have never participated in one, and no, I have not actually done one. But that's a good idea, Gladys. Maybe that's what I should do within the crew. We've been talking about doing a block of the month there. Angelicus has said, I made a flannel log cabin, and some of the cheaper ones, I presume the cheaper squares, are already shredding along the seams rather quickly. Caution. So that's not really particularly a question, but more of an advice. Yes, that's often, I'm sure many people in the chat have experienced this. There's some fabrics that just fray just when you look at them. You know, you haven't done anything and suddenly you've lost half your seam allowance. And flannel can be that one. Flannel is one of those fabrics that I always pre-wash. Everything else is kind of iffy, but I always pre-wash flannel just to make it a little bit tighter. And it also depends on, it depends on, you know, your skill. Our so many of us on our first couple of quilts, our seam allowance isn't sometimes the most perfect. So it's tricky. And I would just go over that with a zigzag or something and just try and tack them down if the batting's not exposed. Kathy has asked, any future cruises planned? I missed timing for your upcoming trip. Next year, I am doing a trip to Scandinavia. We're just putting the final dots and crosses on that one. A little bit earlier, I think it goes from May, and I think it goes from Holland. I think it goes from Amsterdam. I was saying it was going from Rotterdam, but I checked it the other day, and it's actually Amsterdam that it leaves from. And in the fall, I'm doing a textile tour that's not a cruise. It's a land tour with a private coach, and in Holland and Belgium. Yeah. I'm not quite sure what this means. Judy Goldblum Mallet has said, go to all the Michigan shop hops. There are actually 12 different states. Gina was telling me about this the other day, how many stores are involved in it. Next year, I'm definitely going to have to do it. We were talking about it. Even if I just do the ones that are in the thumb of Michigan. I think she said there was 25 stores in that area. I was definitely full of FOMO. Okay, Claudette Hall was just in a free motion quilting class, and the instructor didn't like her polyester thread. Can you recommend what type of thread to use or an example of a brand? So there's two that I use So Fine, and that's by Superior Threads, and I use Deco Bob from Wonderful. I don't use, I think I've got a spool of a couple of other brands. I do have a couple of spools of Glide, and I don't mind their 60 weight, but I do not like their cottonized 50 weight. Just not working for me. It just feels very, just doesn't feel fine to me, where the other brands are nice and smooth. So those are the two that I use, So Fine and Deco Bob. Hazel says she's bought a huge stash from a retiring quilter. Holy mackerel. Make us all have FOMO there. I realized from the way the edges have raveled that it all has been washed. Should I have separate stashes for pre-washed and unwashed, or mix them? So I've been doing some experiments with them, and it's not quite as devastating as you think. If it depends on the size of the square. If you're making if you're making a quilt that you want to be special and things like that, I would only use one type or the other. But if you're making Linus and some other charity quilts and things like that, I wouldn't worry about it that much. There's just the crinkleification on different parts of the quilt will be different, but the batting itself is going to hold things in place a lot. So I did an experiment with some baby quilts a number of years ago, and I did pre-washed fabrics and non-pre-washed, and I look at the shrinkage, and there wasn't a big deal of difference. But what happened was one looked more crinkly than the other, and I think they shrunk about 10 to 12%. But when I take my big king-size quilt and took that to the laundromat, it went from 108 to 103. So that's 5 inches, and that's not the same percentage. Like, that's down low. I forget whether somebody can do the math for me, but that's definitely not 12%. So, yeah. So I would keep them separate. I would keep them separate and wash. That's what I'm doing right now. I pre-wash as I approach a project, and I don't worry about the scraps. Okay, so we've got all sorts of crew members here. We've got Marianne, Kathy Has Faith, Rachel Jones, Barbara's here, Diane's here, Gladys is here, Rebecca's here, Marlene's here, Linda So Imperfect, Nancy, Noor, and Ginny. Noor Nisan Abul Salam from Malaysia, welcome. That is pretty well on the opposite side of the world that I am on. So since we were talking about the crew, let me just say that our next Stitch and Chat is Sunday, June 9th. That's this weekend at 11 p.m. to 1. And if you missed it, within the crew, I did a beginner foundation paper piecing class, and we recorded it. And everybody has access to that. Just look in the community page under Karen's Quilt Crew, and you can watch that until June 30th. It was 30 days that you had access to it. It went really well. Everybody had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun teaching it. So in next month, we will be doing an English paper piecing intro class. I'll give you more of an update of that. We're aiming for the 3rd to 4th week of July, but I'm just waiting to see what I'm like after the cruise. I may be totally exhausted. I may be full of lots of energy. So I'll set the date when I get back from the cruise. What else is there? If you missed it, my last video, I finally finished my crumb quilt. This is what you can see the blue lines on there. That's that peacock linen that I used to sew the strips together. No, I have not counted how many pieces are in it, but there are a lot. and it is big. So check out that video if you haven't seen it yet. And I've had two people on the podcast. I've had Gunrun Urla from the Stripology, the visionary behind the Stripology ruler. And I just last week I had Erin Bushin. She says it rhymes with cushion. Bushin. And she's talking about her wonderful year-long project that she's doing, which is just strikes and crosses on mass gun. What do you call it? Mass gun violence. Yeah. And you know, she's gone on this this journey for this year, and it's been very interesting listening to how she's had to manage the project, what parameters she put in place, and how she's protecting her mental health. Yeah. And this one was done a couple of weeks ago, the magic of freezer paper. Lots of different ways you can use it. I'm actually using it on my new hexagon, Milli Fiore. I have finished the top, so I have used it. I've been putting strips of freezer paper along the outside edges so that it doesn't distort while I remove the papers, add the seam allowances, and get it onto the long arm. And I mentioned it before, but there's still time to join us. I am doing a textile tour in Holland and Belgium this September. We are going to all sorts of wonderful different places. We have a flax day, we have a linen day, we are meeting with an embroiderer. There's lots of great things. I've got a couple things still that may happen that weren't in the original plans as too. So lots of good things. I think I have time for a couple more questions here. For outer borders, we get this question a lot, and I haven't done my border video yet. For outer borders, what can you do to prevent it from rippling, and does cutting the border by the length of fabric make it sit better than cutting it by width of fabric? So cutting strips with the length of grain is the best way to do it, but it's also the most expensive way to do it. So are you really wanting to buy 3 yards of fabric that you'll only use maybe at the most, maybe a quarter, maybe a half, and so that they can lie flat? The most important thing is to measure. And the other thing is that we have so many patterns these days where the designers are not watching out for the way the grain is lying in your pieces. So often the borders are being attached to seams that are biased. They're all on the bias, and that has a lot of stretch in it. So you have to be careful to stabilize it. So I recommend doing what I just said I was doing. Take some freezer paper and try to stabilize it. Just iron it in place until you don't need it anymore. You can also just baste a line of stitching across it, but anything that is not on the grain will eventually stretch on you, no matter how good you are. So if you're cutting HSTs, and there's a strip method where you sew almost a tube together and then you cut them, you know, that just makes things so tricky. And there's another one where you sew around the outside edge and then do a cross. Once it's on the bias, it's always on the bias. So even while you've sewn it together and it's incorporated in the quilt, it can still stretch. It can still stretch on you. So that's one way, but always measure. So measure at the top, measure in the middle, measure at the bottom, and try and it's better to have a slightly misshapen corner than to have a wonky border. But that said, if you get a wonky border, depending on what's in it, if it's a piece border, it's a little bit harder to deal with. If it's a solid border, I would just tuck in the fabric and sew a seam down it. And it is what it is. but your quilt may be at a square that way. So it's just one of these things that you're trying to balance as you become a more proficient quilter. So you're trying to make your blocks more square, but you still have the challenge of putting the blocks into a quilt, and then you have the challenge of making the quilt square so you can get the borders on, and it's just always a negotiation as you bring up your skills. Flip as you go patterns. Mary Gearing has asked, any plans for some flip as you go patterns? I'm not quite sure what flip as you go is. Is that just adding pieces to a strip? Rachel Jones has asked, if your QST pieces of fabric are off, how do you fix that? Well, it depends whether you've ironed them. If you've ironed them, they may be out of shape and you just have to trim them down because you can never get it back into shape. When I'm working with a lot of QSTs, often I will make a paper piece pattern. Like I will just draw it and then do foundation paper piecing in that little section so I can keep my QST squares. If you're doing like a Mary's triangles, or there's a 2 at a time method. I've done a video on it. And again, it's like when you're sewing 2 HSTs. Everything's just a little bit more stabilized because you're sewing with squares and it's just easier. But if you've got a QST that's off now, I would just trim it to the size it's supposed to be. That's really all you can do unless you decide to make another block. Yeah. So everyone, thank you, Lynn, for the super sticker. I appreciate that. I'll drink a cup of coffee tomorrow and I'll remember you. Thank you so much. I love your dog. Somebody's asked, how is Mando? Unfortunately, Mando is still limping. He's got an issue with his leg that was broken. It's not something that you can feel, not something you can touch, but we keep him on leashed walks and he'll seem to get better, and then he'll just have this burst of energy and chase after a squadron of Canada geese, and it'll be sore again. So when we get back from our trip, we'll have to go to an orthopedic vet and see if there's something more that we can do. But until then, he's just on little walks. I get to look after my granddogs this weekend. My daughter is coming into town, and she and her husband are taking their first wedding anniversary, and they're heading to Washington to see some people that they follow on YouTube. So it's yeah, so I'm going to be busy babysitting children this week. My sewing room is turning into a 3rd bedroom for another couple of weeks, so I'm going to actually have to be here at the studio a lot too. So one last question here. Somebody has asked, how do I pick an accent color for a memory quilt? Well, if it's a memory quilt for somebody in particular, I would be asking them what color did they want on the background. If it's a background color, it can pick up different tones from the fabrics in front. It's unlikely that, I'm not sure if you're doing it with t-shirts or you're doing it with woven shirts, but it's unlikely they'll all be the same color. It'll be kind of a crazy quilt type of pattern, and you can lay out your colors and your t-shirts and everything and distribute them the way that gives you balance. The other thing to check in if it's for someone else is which t-shirts or shirts are more important than others, because we just receive them and we think they're all equal, and the truth is some of them have more importance and more memories than others, and those are the ones that you want to put in the middle or just above the middle. Yeah. Well, thank you everyone. Brenda H, I appreciate all your comments in the chat today. Look at, oh boy. Thank you so much, guys. You are all the best. I love the way that you all jump in and invite other people make other people feel invited and answer their questions. Oh, I'm just hearing. Terry, I am so sorry for your loss. So sorry. Oh. Yes, somebody just know there's a lot of history on doing a quilt, and she's not American. How do you start without being impolite? I want to learn and respect the culture, but no clue how to start. Well, you just start. Just start. And what's American about quilting is the piecing. The stitching and the combining layers together has been around a lot longer, but it's the piecing that really took off in America. And part of that was the magazines and the community and the network that it provided for people as well. So, yeah, there's a lot of wonderful history with quilting. But I was just I got a book on French quilting years ago. There's a particular technique, and it's kind of coming up again, but there they stuff. It's not like the Italian one where they have these big puffs of quilting. They have little tracks of stuffing that they do. As they quilt, they stuff in and they make ridges and everything like that. It's just fascinating, the history of needlecrafts all over the world. Anyways, thank you everyone for showing up. We've got some more great interviews coming up on the podcast, so stay tuned in there. I have a video coming out tomorrow, I think. I should be done. Just got the edit back from Nicole about an hour ago, and it's on some pouches and cases that I've made for my trip to hold my electronics. So I hope you enjoy it too. So thank you everyone for showing up. You guys are always, as I say, you're the best crew anybody could ask for. I just, I don't know how I got to be so lucky. I love you all. Thank you so much. And I'll see you next time.